In the pristine marble lobby of Phoenix Financial Tower, where million-dollar deals were sealed with handshakes and power lunches determined the fate of entire industries, nobody expected what happened during the annual shareholders' meeting. When 7-year-old Isabella broke free from her mother's executive assistant and ran straight across the crowded atrium to a janitor mopping floors by the elevator bank, wrapping her tiny arms around his waist and shouting, "Real Daddy!" loud enough for every board member, investor, and business reporter to hear. 3 carefully constructed lives shattered in an instant. The stunned silence that followed would be captured on security cameras, shared across social media platforms within hours, and spark a story that revealed how love, sacrifice, and the courage of one determined little girl could expose the truth that powerful people had spent years hiding. This is the story behind the moment that broke the internet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 42nd floor of Phoenix Financial Tower commanded a breathtaking view of downtown Seattle, where glass and steel monuments to corporate success stretched toward the gray November sky like metallic fingers grasping for more power, more influence, more control over the economic landscape that shaped millions of lives. Inside the building's most prestigious conference room, 200 of the nation's most influential investors, board members, and financial journalists had gathered for Corwin Financial Group's annual shareholders meeting, an event that typically generated headlines about market projections, expansion strategies, and the kind of billion-dollar decisions that could reshape entire industries overnight. Aveline Corwin stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, her tailored charcoal suit commanding attention and respect from every person in the room. At 34, she had transformed her late father's modest investment firm into a financial empire worth over $3 billion, earning recognition as one of the youngest and most successful CEOs in American business history. Her presentation about fourth-quarter earnings and international expansion plans had proceeded flawlessly for nearly an hour, each PowerPoint slide reinforcing her reputation for strategic brilliance and uncompromising leadership in an industry still dominated by men twice her age with half her vision. But at precisely 2:47 p.m., as Aveline concluded her remarks about projected growth in Asian markets and prepared to field questions from the assembled shareholders, her carefully orchestrated professional world collided with the truth she had spent 7 years systematically concealing from public scrutiny. The conference room's heavy wooden doors burst open with enough force to startle every person in attendance, and 7-year-old Isabella Corwin came racing through the space between investor tables with the kind of desperate determination that suggested she had been planning this moment for weeks. Her small feet moved with surprising speed across the marble floor, her navy blue dress flowing behind her as she navigated between leather chairs and startled executives who turned to watch this unexpected interruption of their serious business discussions. Isabella's target was unmistakably clear from the moment she entered the room, her dark eyes fixed on a figure that most of the distinguished guests had barely noticed during their arrival in networking conversations before the meeting began. The back corner of the conference room, beside a service cart loaded with fresh coffee and pastries that had been prepared for the meeting's afternoon break, stood Zephyr Stone. His weathered hands gripped the handle of a commercial-grade mop, and his faded blue uniform bore the simple embroidered logo of Phoenix Financial Tower's maintenance department. At 38, Zephyr possessed the kind of quiet, unassuming presence that allowed him to move through the building's corridors, virtually invisible to the executives and power brokers who conducted their important business in offices far above his pay grade and social standing. But Isabella saw him with perfect clarity, recognition, and an absolute certainty that defied every logical explanation that the adults in her life had spent years constructing to protect her from complicated truths. She ran directly toward him, her purple backpack bouncing against her small shoulders, and launched herself into his arms with the kind of uninhibited joy that only comes from finding something precious that has been lost for far too long. Words she shouted echoed through the suddenly silent conference room with devastating clarity. "Real Daddy! I knew you'd be here. I knew if I looked hard enough I'd find you." The transformation in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and profound. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, coffee cups froze halfway to lips, and every head turned toward this unprecedented disruption of corporate protocol. The assembled shareholders, board members, and journalists found themselves witnessing something far more dramatic and emotionally complex than quarterly earnings reports or market analysis. They were seeing a family secret explode into public view with the force of a financial scandal. Zephyr's face went pale as Isabella wrapped her arms around his waist, but his hands moved instinctively to steady her, to protect her from falling, even as his eyes darted nervously toward the front of the room where Aveline Corwin stood frozen behind the presentation podium. The gentleness of his movements, the automatic protectiveness of his posture, and the unmistakable love in his expression as he looked down at Isabella created a picture that spoke louder than any corporate press release or carefully crafted public relations statement ever could. At the head of the conference table, Aveline felt her carefully constructed world begin to crumble with the efficiency of a controlled demolition. Every strategic decision she had made to protect her reputation, every legal document she had signed to maintain her professional image, every story she had told to explain Isabella's father's absence, all of it was being undone by her daughter's fearless determination to claim the relationship that had been systematically denied to both of them. The security cameras positioned throughout Phoenix Financial Tower's most prestigious conference room captured every moment of this collision between public success and private truth, recording footage that would be analyzed, shared, and debated across social media platforms within hours of the meeting's conclusion. But what those high-definition cameras couldn't capture was the complex mixture of terror and relief that washed over Aveline as she realized that the secret she had guarded so carefully for 7 years was finally, irrevocably, completely exposed. Silence stretched for exactly 17 seconds, long enough for every person in attendance to process what they were witnessing, to understand that this wasn't a simple case of mistaken identity or confusion, but something far more significant and emotionally charged. The way Isabella clung to Zephyr, the way his eyes sought Aveline's across the crowded room, and the way Aveline's composed professional demeanor cracked just enough to reveal the woman beneath the corporate armor. All of it told a story that transcended the financial world's usual concerns with profit, margins, and strategic acquisitions. This was the moment that would break the internet, spark countless articles about corporate responsibility and personal integrity, and force everyone present to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the most important stories happen not in boardrooms or executive suites, but in the spaces between what people choose to reveal and what they spend their lives trying to hide. 6 floors below the executive conference room, where his life was about to change forever, Zephyr Stone began each workday at precisely 5:30 a.m. by unlocking the maintenance department supply closet in the basement level of Phoenix Financial Tower. His morning routine had remained virtually unchanged for the past 14 months since he had accepted this position, a steady rhythm of preparation and purpose that helped him navigate the complex emotional landscape of working in a building that housed both his livelihood and his deepest source of joy and pain. The industrial fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across his angular face as he methodically loaded his supply cart with cleaning materials, replacement light bulbs, and the specialized equipment required to maintain a 42-story monument to financial success. His hands, permanently marked by years of construction work before his career change, moved with practiced efficiency as he organized the tools that would carry him through another day of maintaining other people's pristine professional environments. While wrestling with his own carefully hidden personal struggles, Zephyr's apartment in the Willowbrook district stood in stark contrast to the gleaming corporate world where he spent his working hours. The modest two-bedroom unit on the third floor of Maple Ridge Apartments represented the best housing he could afford on a maintenance worker's salary, furnished with second-hand furniture and decorated with photographs that told the story of a life that had taken unexpected turns and required constant adaptation to circumstances beyond his control. The living room's most prominent feature was a wall covered with crayon drawings, watercolor paintings, and construction paper crafts that had been carefully preserved behind plastic sleeves and arranged with the kind of loving attention usually reserved for museum-quality artwork. Each piece was signed in careful, developing handwriting. Isabella, age 6 inches, or, for Daddy, Love Isabella, or simply I love you, decorated with hearts and flowers that represented the artistic output of a young person whose creativity flourished. Despite the complicated circumstances of her family situation, these artworks had been delivered to Zephyr through a complex network of intermediaries, teachers, babysitters, and family friends who understood that sometimes love finds ways to express itself even when official channels have been systematically blocked by legal documents and social expectations. Each drawing represented a victory against the forces that sought to keep father and daughter separated, a small act of rebellion against the assumption that children should accept adult decisions about their family structures without question. Or resistance. His refrigerator door displayed a collection of school photos spanning the past 4 years, documenting Isabella's growth from a gap-toothed kindergartner to the confident second grader she had become. Zephyr knew her schedule by heart, that she attended Roosevelt Elementary School, that she took piano lessons on Tuesdays and soccer practice on Thursdays, that her favorite color was purple and her least favorite food was Brussels sprouts. This information came to him through the same unofficial network that delivered her artwork, a group of people who believed that knowing his daughter was safe and thriving was worth the risk of violating the legal boundaries that kept him officially absent from her daily life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The financial reality of Zephyr's situation was carefully documented in a worn notebook that he kept in his kitchen drawer, pages filled with calculations that demonstrated his determination to contribute meaningfully to Isabella's welfare despite the legal restrictions that prevented direct involvement in her upbringing. Every month, he transferred a portion of his modest maintenance salary into a savings account earmarked for Isabella's future education, money that would eventually find its way to her through the same network of supporters who helped maintain their emotional connection across the legal barriers that separated them. His colleagues in the Phoenix Financial Tower Maintenance Department knew Zephyr as utterly reliable and uncommonly dedicated. The kind of employee who volunteered for extra shifts during holidays and consistently arrived early to ensure that every detail of the building's operation met the exacting standards expected by its prestigious tenants. They appreciated his quiet competence and unassuming helpfulness, but none of them knew about the personal motivation that drove his exceptional work ethic or understood why he sometimes lingered longer than necessary in certain areas of the building. What they couldn't see was the way Zephyr's pulse quickened every morning when he entered the marble lobby through the service entrance, knowing that somewhere within this towering corporate monument was the person who gave his life meaning and purpose. They didn't notice how his eyes automatically scanned every corridor and elevator bank for a glimpse of dark hair and bright eyes, or how he had memorized the schedule of executive meetings and corporate events that might bring Isabella to the building for special occasions or school holidays. The other maintenance workers saw his dedication to excellence as professional pride, but the truth was more complex and emotionally driven. Every pristine floor he mopped, every gleaming surface he polished, and every malfunctioning system he repaired was performed with the hidden hope that his work might somehow contribute to creating an environment where his daughter could thrive and succeed. He took personal satisfaction in ensuring that Phoenix Financial Tower operated flawlessly, knowing that Isabella's mother built her empire within these walls and that his daughter might someday walk these same corridors as more than just an occasional visitor. The transformation from construction worker to maintenance professional had required Zephyr to develop new skills and adapt to a completely different work environment. But he approached these challenges with the same quiet determination that had carried him through every other major transition in his adult life. His supervisors praised his attention to detail and his ability to solve complex mechanical problems, qualities that had served him well during his previous career building homes and commercial structures throughout the Pacific Northwest. But they had no way of understanding that his current position represented more than just employment. It was his only legitimate connection to the world where his daughter was growing up, learning and developing into the remarkable young person whose artwork covered his apartment walls. Every day he spent maintaining Phoenix Financial Tower was a day he spent in the same building where Isabella's future was being shaped, and that proximity was worth more to him than any salary increase or career advancement opportunity that might take him further away from her daily life. The 34th floor of Phoenix Financial Tower housed the executive offices of Corwin Financial Group, a world of mahogany paneling, leather furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of Seattle's financial district. Within this rarefied environment, Aveline Corwin had assembled a team of professionals whose expertise and loyalty had been essential to building her corporate empire, but whose personal relationships with their demanding boss remained carefully compartmentalized and professionally appropriate. Margaret Chun served as Aveline's executive assistant, a position that required diplomatic skills, organizational genius, and the ability to manage complex scheduling challenges while maintaining absolute discretion about sensitive business matters and personal information. At 42, Margaret had spent 8 years working closely with Aveline, long enough to develop genuine admiration for her boss's strategic brilliance while also recognizing the personal costs that such intense professional focus inevitably extracted from anyone determined to succeed at the highest levels of American business. Margaret's office, adjacent to Aveline's executive suite, functioned as the nerve center for Corwin Financial Group's daily operations, equipped with multiple phone lines, computer monitors displaying real-time market data, and filing systems that contained detailed information about every client relationship and business transaction that required Aveline's personal attention. But Margaret also maintained unofficial responsibilities that extended beyond traditional executive assistance, serving as a protective buffer between Aveline and the outside world when personal matters threatened to intrude upon professional obligations. The corporate culture at Corwin Financial Group reflected Aveline's leadership style, demanding but fair, innovative but grounded in proven financial principles, ambitious but committed to ethical business practices that had earned the company respect within an industry often criticized for prioritizing profit over social responsibility. The company's success had created opportunities for dozens of employees whose talents might otherwise have gone unrecognized in more traditional financial institutions, fostering a sense of loyalty and shared purpose that extended throughout every department and organizational level. Dr. James Whitmore, the company's chief financial officer, had joined Corwin Financial Group 3 years earlier after a distinguished career at several major Wall Street firms. Attracted by Aveline's vision for creating a more inclusive and socially conscious approach to wealth management and investment strategy, his expertise in international markets and regulatory compliance had been instrumental in the company's expansion into European and Asian financial centers, achievements that had enhanced both his professional reputation and his personal respect for Aveline's leadership capabilities. However, Dr. Whitmore had also observed subtle changes in Aveline's demeanor over the past several months, a barely perceptible increase in tension and distraction, that suggested personal concerns were competing for attention with professional responsibilities. His attempts to discuss these observations had been politely but firmly deflected, reinforcing his understanding that Eveline maintained strict boundaries between her public role as corporate leader and whatever private challenges she might be facing outside the office environment. The building's security department, headed by former Seattle police detective Sarah Martinez, operated with military precision and attention to detail that reflected the high-value assets and sensitive information housed within Phoenix Financial Tower's 42 floors. Sarah's team included a dozen security officers who rotated through shifts covering every entrance, elevator bank, and restricted area within the building, their presence both visible enough to deter potential problems and discreet enough to avoid interfering with the normal flow of business activities. Sarah had developed particular expertise in managing situations where personal drama threatened to disrupt professional environments, her background in law enforcement providing valuable insights into human behavior and conflict resolution. She maintained detailed files on all building employees, including background checks and periodic updates that helped identify potential security risks or unusual patterns of behavior that might require additional attention or intervention. Maintenance department operated under the supervision of Tom Bradley, a veteran building manager whose 30-year career in commercial property management had taught him that successful facility operation depended as much on understanding people as on maintaining mechanical systems. Tom had hired Zephyr Stone after being impressed by his technical skills and work ethic, but he had also noticed subtle signs that his newest employee carried emotional burdens that extended beyond typical workplace concerns. Tom's approach to management emphasized personal responsibility and professional development, creating an environment where maintenance staff felt valued and respected rather than merely tolerated as necessary but invisible support personnel. He encouraged his team to take pride in their work and understand their contributions to the overall success of Phoenix Financial Tower's prestigious reputation, fostering a sense of purpose that extended beyond simple task completion. The building's daily operations involved hundreds of professionals whose individual responsibilities contributed to maintaining an environment where billion-dollar financial transactions could be conducted with complete confidence in the infrastructure that supported such high-stakes business activities. From the reception desk staff who greeted visitors and managed security protocols to the food service workers who operated the executive dining facilities on the 38th floor, every employee understood that their performance reflected on Phoenix Financial Tower's reputation for excellence and reliability. Roosevelt Elementary School, located 15 minutes from Phoenix Financial Tower, had become an important part of this extended community through its connections to several employees whose families were served by the school's academic programs and extracurricular activities. Principal Linda Foster had developed relationships with parents who worked in Seattle's financial district, understanding that their demanding professional schedules sometimes required creative solutions to typical school-family communication and involvement challenges. Isabella's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, had taught at Roosevelt Elementary for 12 years, long enough to recognize when students carried emotional complexities that extended beyond normal academic and social development. Isabella's exceptional artistic abilities and unusual maturity in certain situations had caught Mrs. Thompson's attention, prompting informal conversations with school counselors about providing additional support for students whose family situations might benefit from extra understanding and flexibility. The broader Seattle community surrounding Phoenix Financial Tower included neighborhoods where corporate executives lived in luxury and areas where working-class families struggled with housing costs and economic uncertainty, creating a social ecosystem that reflected the broader inequalities and connections that shaped urban life in one of America's most economically dynamic cities. These different worlds rarely intersected in meaningful ways, but when they did, The results could be transformative for everyone involved. The morning of November 15th began like countless others in Isabella's carefully structured 7-year-old world, with her grandmother Alina preparing breakfast in the kitchen of their Beacon Hill condominium while Isabella sat at the dining room table working on a social studies project about family trees that had been consuming her thoughts for the past 3 weeks. The assignment, designed by Mrs. Thompson to help second graders understand family relationships and heritage, had seemed simple enough when first introduced, but had gradually evolved into something more complicated and emotionally challenging than anyone had anticipated. Isabella's colored pencils moved across the large sheet of construction paper with unusual hesitation, her small fingers pausing frequently as she tried to decide how to fill in the branches that were supposed to represent the people who had shaped her identity and family history. The official story she had been taught about her father, that he had been a European businessman who died in a skiing accident before her birth, felt increasingly hollow and unsatisfying as she attempted to translate it into the concrete visual format required by her school assignment. Her grandmother Elena, who had raised Isabella since infancy while Aveline built her corporate empire, noticed the unusual difficulty her granddaughter was experiencing with what should have been a straightforward homework task. Elena's own relationship with family truth was complicated, shaped by decades of protecting Aveline from social judgment and supporting decisions that had seemed necessary at the time but had grown more morally ambiguous as years passed and circumstances changed. The previous evening's conversation between grandmother and granddaughter had revealed the depth of Isabella's confusion and growing dissatisfaction with the explanation she had received about her father's absence from her daily life. Her questions had become more specific and harder to deflect. Why were there no photographs of her father in their home? Why had none of his family members ever contacted them? Why did her artistic style seem so different from both her mother's and grandmother's creative abilities? Elena's attempts to redirect Isabella's curiosity toward other topics had been met with the kind of polite but persistent resistance that suggested a 7-year-old's determination to solve a puzzle that adults seemed reluctant to help her complete. Isabella's artistic talents, which had flourished under professional instruction and natural development, had begun producing work that seemed to draw from some deeper source of inspiration than her formal art classes could explain. The decision to accompany her mother to Phoenix Financial Tower for the annual shareholders meeting had been Isabella's idea, presented with the kind of careful logic that demonstrated her growing sophistication in understanding how to achieve goals that adults might otherwise consider inappropriate or inconvenient. She had argued that seeing her mother's professional environment would help her complete a separate school project about careers and community helpers, a request that seemed reasonable enough to warrant approval. But Isabella's true motivation was far more complex and emotionally driven than her surface explanation suggested. Over the past several months, her visits to Phoenix Financial Tower had become opportunities for careful observation and systematic exploration, her young mind cataloging details about the building's layout, personnel, and daily routines that might prove useful in solving the mystery that had begun consuming her thoughts and creative energy. Her awareness of Zephyr Stone had developed gradually, beginning with fleeting glimpses during elevator rides and corridor transitions that had sparked an inexplicable sense of recognition and curiosity. Something about his gentle demeanor and careful attention to his work had caught her attention in ways that other building employees hadn't, creating an internal sense of connection that she lacked the vocabulary to articulate but absolutely refused to dismiss as imagination. The breakthrough had come during a previous visit when Isabella had observed Zephyr helping an elderly investor who had dropped important documents near the elevator bank. His immediate response and natural kindness, creating a moment of clarity that connected seemingly unrelated pieces of information she had been unconsciously collecting. The way he moved, the shape of his hands, even the tone of his voice when offering assistance, all of it aligned with impressions and memories that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her conscious awareness. Her plan for the shareholders meeting had been developing for weeks, each detail carefully considered and refined through the kind of methodical thinking that would have impressed her mother if applied to business problems rather than family mysteries. Isabella had studied the meeting schedule, memorized the building's security protocols, and identified the optimal moment when her actions would have maximum impact and minimum chance of being prevented by well-meaning adults. The morning's preparation had included selecting her favorite purple backpack, not for its aesthetic appeal, but because it contained items she might need if her plan succeeded beyond her most optimistic expectations. A small notebook with questions she wanted to ask, photographs she had drawn based on half-remembered dreams, and a letter she had written but never sent expressing feelings she didn't fully understand but knew were important. Her grandmother's final instructions about proper behavior during the corporate meeting had been received with the kind of attentive compliance that suggested complete understanding and agreement. But Isabella's internal focus was entirely dedicated to the mission she had been planning, since recognizing that adults would never provide the answers she needed without some form of decisive action on her part. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor had felt longer than usual, each floor marker increasing both her nervous energy and her determination to finally resolve the questions that had been shaping her thoughts and dreams for months. Isabella's understanding of adult emotions and social dynamics was sophisticated enough to recognize that her actions would create complications and possibly upset people she cared about. But her need for truth had become stronger than her desire to avoid causing problems. Standing in the corridor outside the conference room where Seattle's most powerful financial leaders were discussing quarterly reports and market projections, Isabella felt the same mixture of fear and excitement that characterized all important moments in a 7-year-old's emotional landscape. She had reached the point of no return, where an action felt more frightening than whatever consequences might result from following through on her carefully developed plan. The heavy wooden doors opened easily under her small hands, and Isabella stepped into a room full of adults whose attention was completely focused on the woman at the front of the room, who shared her eyes and smile, but had never provided satisfactory explanations about the missing pieces of their family puzzle. But Isabella's attention was immediately drawn to the figure standing quietly near the back corner, the man whose presence in her life had been denied, but whose existence she had finally located through patience, observation, and in 7-year-olds' unwillingness to accept that some questions were too complicated for honest answers. 8 years and 4 months earlier, Eveline Montgomery had been a different person entirely. A 25-year-old graduate student at the University of Washington, pursuing an MBA while working part-time at her father's modest investment counseling firm and believing that love could transcend the social and economic barriers that had historically divided American society into carefully separated classes and communities. Her idealism had been genuine but untested, shaped by academic theories about social mobility and economic opportunity, rather than practical experience with the forces that protected established power structures from disruption by inconvenient emotions. Zephyr Stone had been 29 then, operating a small construction company that specialized in affordable housing projects and community development initiatives throughout Seattle's working-class neighborhoods. His reputation for quality, craftsmanship, and fair business practices had earned him steady work and the respect of colleagues who appreciated his commitment to building homes that would serve families for generations rather than maximizing profit through corner-cutting and substandard materials that created problems for future residents. Their initial meeting had occurred at a community planning meeting where Eveline was conducting research for her graduate thesis on sustainable urban development, and Zephyr was advocating for affordable housing policies that would allow working families to remain in neighborhoods where their roots and support systems were already established. The attraction had been immediate and mutual, sparked by shared values about social responsibility and genuine interest in each other's perspectives on complex issues that affected real people's daily lives, the relationship that developed over the following 6 months had been conducted largely outside the social circles that shaped both of their professional and family environments, creating a private world where their differences in educational background and economic status seemed less important than their emotional compatibility and shared vision for creating positive change in their community. Avellini had been careful to keep Zephyr separate from her corporate internship and family obligations, not from embarrassment, but from an instinctive understanding that introducing him to her father's business associates would create pressures and judgments that might complicate something beautiful and meaningful. Zephyr's construction projects during this period had included several community centers and low-income housing developments that reflected his commitment to using his professional skills to address social problems rather than simply pursuing maximum financial return. His crew respected his leadership style and his willingness to take on challenging projects that other contractors avoided because of location, complexity, or limited profit margins, creating a small business that prioritized community impact over rapid expansion or accumulation of personal wealth. The pregnancy had been unplanned but welcomed by both prospective parents, who began making practical arrangements for combining their different lifestyles and career paths into a family structure that could accommodate Evelyn's emerging role in her father's expanding business and Zephyr's commitment to socially conscious construction work. Their plans had included purchasing a modest home in a neighborhood that balanced access to downtown Seattle's business district with the community-oriented atmosphere that both of them valued for raising a family. But Evelyn's father, Robert Montgomery, had built his investment firm's reputation on understanding how personal decisions could impact professional opportunities and business relationships in ways that idealistic young people often failed to anticipate. His concerns about his daughter's relationship had initially been practical rather than prejudicial, focused on the potential complications of combining different social and economic backgrounds rather than judgments about Zephyr's character or worthiness as a partner and father. Robert's investigation into Zephyr's background had revealed nothing problematic or concerning, but had confirmed significant differences in educational credentials, family financial resources, and professional networks that could create challenges for a daughter whose career success would increasingly depend on her ability to navigate Seattle's business and social elite. His conversations with trusted advisors and longtime clients had reinforced his belief that Evelyn's personal choices would inevitably affect her professional opportunities in ways that might limit her potential for achieving the kind of success that her talents and ambition deserved. The pressure had been subtle but persistent, applied through conversations about business opportunities that might require different lifestyle choices and social connections, about the importance of maintaining professional credibility in industries where personal reputation could determine access to capital and client relationships, and about the responsibility that came with inheriting a business that provided livelihoods for dozens of employees whose families depended on continued growth and success. Evelyn's internal conflict had been genuine and painful, torn between love for Zephyr and growing recognition that their different backgrounds might create obstacles to the kind of professional success that would allow her to create positive change on a larger scale than individual relationships could achieve. Her pregnancy had complicated these considerations by creating immediate pressure for decisions that would affect not only her own future, but also the welfare of her unborn daughter and the man she loved but might not be able to marry without sacrificing other important goals and responsibilities. The legal arrangements that separated Zephyr from his parental rights had been presented as temporary solutions to immediate problems, allowing Avellini to protect her daughter from social stigma while she established her professional credentials and built the financial resources that would eventually make their family situation less vulnerable to outside pressure and economic uncertainty. The documents had been signed with the understanding that Modifications would be possible once Evelyn's business success created more flexibility and independence from her father's influence and advice, but temporary solutions had gradually become permanent arrangements as Corwin Financial Group's success created new opportunities and responsibilities that required increasing amounts of time and energy, making personal relationship complications seem like unnecessary risks to achievements. That benefited not only Aveline and her daughter, but also the employees and clients who depended on her leadership and strategic vision. The guilt and regret had been manageable as long as Aveline could convince herself that her professional success was ultimately serving her daughter's long-term interests by creating financial security and social opportunities that would have been impossible under different circumstances. The transformation of her identity from Aveline Montgomery to Aveline Corwin had been gradual but systematic, involving legal name changes, carefully crafted biographical information, and the construction of a personal history that eliminated inconvenient emotional complications while emphasizing achievements and characteristics that enhanced her professional credibility and social acceptability. The fictional story about Isabella's father had been developed through consultation with public relations professionals who understood how to create narratives that would satisfy public curiosity without inviting further investigation or creating opportunities for embarrassing revelations. Zephyr's attempts to maintain contact with his daughter had been handled through lawyers and intermediaries who transformed his expressions of love and concern into legal documents and formal communications that could be filed away and forgotten, rather than responded to with the kind of personal acknowledgement that might have encouraged continued contact. His letters and gifts had been intercepted and stored in a safe deposit box that Aveline visited annually on Isabella's birthday, a private ritual of remembrance and regret that served as the only remaining connection to the relationship and the person she had abandoned in pursuit of success that increasingly felt hollow despite its impressive external measurements. The 17 seconds of stunned silence that followed Isabella's dramatic declaration seemed to stretch into eternity for everyone present in Phoenix Financial Tower's most prestigious conference room. But the aftermath began with the kind of swift, professional crisis management that separated successful executives from those who crumbled under pressure. Within minutes of Isabella wrapping her arms around Zephyr and claiming him as her real daddy in front of 200 of the financial industry's most influential leaders, a cascade of complications began unfolding that would test every relationship, reputation, and carefully constructed narrative that had shaped the lives of everyone involved. Sarah Martinez, the building's head of security, received an urgent communication through her earpiece before the shareholders' meeting had officially concluded. Her years of law enforcement experience, immediately recognizing that she was dealing with a situation that extended far beyond typical workplace disruptions or security concerns. Her preliminary assessment revealed a complex intersection of personal drama, corporate liability, and potential media crisis that required immediate containment, strategies, and careful coordination between multiple departments and external agencies. First complication emerged within 30 minutes of Isabella's public revelation, when David Chun, a financial journalist from the Seattle Business Journal who had been covering Corwin Financial Group's remarkable growth trajectory for the past 3 years, began making discreet phone calls to colleagues and editors about a story that could potentially reshape public understanding of one of the Pacific Northwest's most celebrated business success stories. His initial inquiries focused on verifying the identities of the people involved and understanding the legal and financial implications of whatever family dynamics had just exploded into public view. Margaret Chun found herself fielding an unprecedented volume of phone calls and email inquiries from board members, major clients, and business partners who had either witnessed the shareholders' meeting disruption firsthand or had received second-hand reports that required immediate clarification and damage control. Her usual diplomatic skills were tested by callers whose questions ranged from genuine concern about Eveline's personal welfare to more calculating inquiries about potential impacts on stock prices and upcoming business deals that might be affected by negative publicity or executive distraction. The legal department at Corwin Financial Group, headed by senior partner Rebecca Morrison, initiated emergency consultations with specialists in family law, employment regulations, and corporate governance to assess potential liabilities and develop strategies for protecting both the company's interests and the personal privacy of everyone involved in what was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare. Rebecca's preliminary analysis revealed multiple areas of legal vulnerability, from potential discrimination claims to securities regulations that governed executive disclosure requirements. Dr. James Whitmore, the company's chief financial officer, convened an impromptu meeting with key department heads to assess immediate operational concerns and develop contingency plans for maintaining business continuity if the unfolding personal crisis created extended disruptions to Eveline's executive functions. His primary concerns focused on upcoming client presentations, regulatory filings, and international negotiations that required Eveline's personal involvement and could not be postponed without significant financial consequences. Meanwhile, at Roosevelt Elementary School, Principal Linda Foster received an unexpected phone call from a clearly distressed Elena, Isabella's grandmother, explaining that family circumstances had created an emergency situation that might require flexible arrangements for Isabella's school attendance and academic responsibilities over the next several days. Elena's carefully worded explanation provided enough information to justify special accommodations without revealing details that could compromise the family's privacy or create additional complications for Isabella's social relationships with classmates and teachers. Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, Isabella's second-grade teacher, immediately recognized that her students' recent behavioral changes and artistic preoccupations had been building toward something more significant than typical developmental challenges. Her review of Isabella's recent schoolwork revealed increasingly sophisticated questions about family relationships and identity formation that suggested a 7-year-old mind grappling with concepts that extended far beyond age-appropriate concerns about belonging and security. The building's maintenance department, under Tom Bradley's supervision, faced their own set of complications as Zephyr's sudden involvement in a high-profile corporate crisis created personnel management challenges that had no precedent in Phoenix Financial Tower's operational history. Tom's immediate concerns included maintaining essential building services while protecting Zephyr from harassment or unwanted attention from media representatives and curious employees who were inevitably drawn to dramatic workplace incidents. Zephyr himself experienced a disorienting mixture of joy and terror as Isabella's public declaration transformed him from invisible support staff into the center of intense scrutiny and speculation. His modest apartment in the Willowbrook district, which had served as a private sanctuary where he could process his complicated emotions about fatherhood and loss, suddenly felt vulnerable and exposed as he realized that his carefully guarded personal information would likely become public knowledge within days or hours. The practical implications of Isabella's revelation extended beyond immediate media attention to include complex questions about legal custody, financial responsibility, and the welfare of a 7-year-old whose emotional needs had been subordinated to adult concerns about reputation and social acceptability. Child welfare specialists within Seattle's Family Services Department began receiving informal inquiries from concerned parties who wanted to ensure that Isabella's best interests would be protected regardless of whatever legal and financial negotiations might be required to resolve the unprecedented family situation. Eveline's attempts to maintain professional composure while processing the personal earthquake that had just demolished 8 years of careful image management created internal conflicts that tested every coping mechanism she had developed during her rise to corporate leadership. Her immediate instinct was to apply the same strategic thinking and damage control techniques that had served her well in business crises. But the emotional complexity of confronting her abandoned relationship with Zephyr while protecting Isabella from adult conflicts required skills and wisdom that her professional training had not provided. The social media implications of Isabella's dramatic declaration became apparent within hours as cell phone videos and first-hand accounts from shareholders' meeting attendees began circulating on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram platforms that could transform private family matters into viral content reaching millions of viewers worldwide. The hashtag #RealDaddy began trending in Seattle and spreading to national audiences hungry for compelling human interest stories that combined corporate power dynamics with universal themes about love, family, and social class divisions. Financial markets responded to the unfolding crisis with typical volatility, as Corwin Financial Group's stock price experienced fluctuations driven by investor uncertainty about potential leadership changes, legal liabilities, and reputational damage that could affect the company's ability to maintain its competitive position in the highly regulated financial services industry. Analysis from market specialists suggested that the situation's resolution would significantly impact long-term investor confidence and strategic business relationships. The complexity of the situation was further complicated by the involvement of multiple legal jurisdictions and regulatory agencies that govern different aspects of the unfolding crisis. From family court systems that would address custody and parental rights issues to employment law specialists who would evaluate potential workplace harassment or discrimination claims stemming from the intersection of personal and professional relationships within Phoenix Financial Tower's corporate environment. Isabella herself, despite being the catalyst for these cascading complications, remained remarkably composed and focused on what she perceived as the successful completion of her mission to reunite with her father. Her understanding of adult emotions and social dynamics was sophisticated enough to recognize that her actions had created stress and uncertainty for people she cared about, but her 7-year-old perspective prioritized truth and family connection over the professional and financial concerns that dominated adult conversations about appropriate responses to unprecedented situations. The evening news broadcasts throughout the Seattle metropolitan area featured reports about the corporate family drama that had unfolded at Phoenix Financial Tower, with journalists struggling to verify details while respecting privacy concerns and legal restrictions that limited their access to information about minor parties and ongoing family court proceedings. The story's human interest appeal ensured continued media attention and public speculation about the underlying circumstances that had led to such a dramatic public revelation. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 o'clock the following morning in Corwin Financial Group's most secure conference room, a space normally reserved for discussions of mergers, acquisitions, and strategic decisions that could reshape entire industries, but now serving as the arena for a confrontation that would determine whether Aveline could maintain her position as one of Seattle's most powerful corporate leaders or would become another cautionary tale about the intersection of personal choices and professional consequences in America's unforgiving business environment. 12 board members, representing billions of dollars in investment capital and decades of combined experience in navigating corporate crises, filed into the mahogany-paneled room with expressions that ranged from concerned support to barely concealed skepticism about Aveline's ability to manage a situation that threatened to undermine everything they had built together over the past 8 years. The morning's financial reports showed continued stock price volatility, and preliminary market analysis suggested that investor confidence was eroding as media coverage intensified and speculation about Corwin Financial Group's leadership stability spread throughout the financial community. Harold Westbrook, the board's longest-serving member and Aveline's father's former business partner, had requested this emergency session after receiving dozens of phone calls from major clients, regulatory officials, and industry colleagues, seeking clarification about the company's stability and future direction. His loyalty to Eveline was genuine but tempered by fiduciary responsibilities to shareholders and employees, whose livelihoods depended on maintaining Corwin Financial Group's reputation for reliable leadership and ethical business practices. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, representing the board's largest institutional investor, had flown in from New York specifically to address concerns about potential securities violations and disclosure requirements that might have been triggered by the revelation of previously undisclosed personal relationships that could affect executive decision-making processes. Her preliminary legal analysis suggested multiple areas where Eveline's handling of her family situation might have created regulatory compliance issues that required immediate attention and remediation. The conference room's atmosphere was thick with tension as Eveline entered wearing her most authoritative charcoal business suit, her expression carefully controlled, but unable to completely mask the emotional exhaustion that had accumulated during a sleepless night spent contemplating the possible destruction of everything she had spent her adult life building. Her opening statement, prepared with assistance from the company's crisis management specialists, attempted to frame the unfolding situation as a private, family matter that would not impact her professional capabilities or the company's operational effectiveness. But Harold Westbrook's first question cut through her carefully rehearsed explanations with the precision of a surgical scalpel. Eveline, we need to understand exactly what legal and financial obligations you may have been concealing from this board, and how those obligations might affect our company's assets, reputation, and regulatory standing. The question hung in the air like a challenge, demanding the kind of complete transparency that successful executives often avoided when personal and professional boundaries became dangerously blurred. Dr. Reynolds followed with an even more direct inquiry that addressed the core of the board's concerns. Our investors deserve to know whether you have been making business decisions while concealing personal relationships that could constitute conflicts of interest or undisclosed liabilities that should have been reported under our fiduciary disclosure requirements. Her tone was professional but unmistakably serious, reflecting the gravity of potential legal consequences that could extend far beyond Eveline's individual situation. The turning point in the confrontation came when Margaret Chun, acting as corporate secretary, was asked to provide detailed information about Zephyr Stone's employment history, background checks, and any unusual interactions with executive staff that might have created inappropriate workplace dynamics. Margaret's obvious discomfort with these questions revealed that she had been aware of at least some aspects of the complicated relationship between Eveline and the building's maintenance staff, raising additional questions about who else might have been complicit in concealing information from the board. Thomas Mitchell, representing pension fund investors, raised concerns about potential discrimination lawsuits from other employees who might claim that Zephyr had received preferential treatment or inappropriate access to executive areas and confidential information because of his undisclosed personal relationship with the company's CEO. His questions revealed the broad scope of potential legal vulnerabilities that extended beyond family law into employment regulations and workplace equity requirements. The confrontation escalated when security footage from Phoenix Financial Tower's surveillance system was reviewed, revealing multiple instances over the past 14 months where Isabella had been allowed access to restricted areas and had interacted with maintenance staff in ways that suggested prior knowledge and established relationships. The implications of these recordings raised questions about whether Eveline had been systematically violating building security protocols and potentially compromising confidential business information. Dr. Whitmore's financial analysis presented during the meeting revealed that the company's stock price had declined by 7% since the shareholders' meeting incident, representing a loss of over $200 million in market capitalization that directly affected pension funds, retirement accounts, and institutional investments that depended on Corwin Financial Group's continued growth and stability. The numbers provided stark evidence of the real-world consequences that personal drama could have on thousands of people who had never been involved in the underlying family conflicts. The most devastating moment of the confrontation occurred when legal counsel Rebecca Morrison presented evidence of the sealed court records and legal agreements that had formalized Zephyr's separation from his parental rights. Documents that revealed the extent of Aveline's active participation in concealing her daughter's paternity and the potential legal liabilities that could result if Zephyr chose to challenge those agreements in family court proceedings that would inevitably become public records. The board's discussion of potential responses to the crisis revealed deep divisions about whether Aveline's leadership could survive the combination of personal scandal and professional complications that were likely to dominate media coverage and regulatory scrutiny for months or years to come. Some members argued that her business achievements and strategic vision were too valuable to sacrifice for personal mistakes that might eventually be resolved through legal settlements and public relations management, but other board members expressed concerns that the situation had already created irreparable damage to the company's reputation and that Aveline's continued leadership would be a constant reminder of the crisis, making it impossible to restore investor confidence and maintain the kind of professional credibility that was essential for success in the highly competitive financial services industry. Their arguments focused on the practical reality that corporate leadership required not only strategic competence but also public trust and personal integrity that could withstand intense scrutiny. The confrontation reached its climax when Harold Westbrook presented Aveline with an ultimatum that forced her to choose between accepting a temporary leave of absence while the legal and regulatory issues were resolved, or facing a formal vote of no confidence that could result in her permanent removal from the company she had built from her father's modest investment counseling practice into a multi-billion-dollar financial empire. The silence that followed this ultimatum was qualitatively different from the shocked quiet that had followed Isabella's revelation in the shareholders' meeting, carrying the weight of decades of business relationships, professional achievements, and personal sacrifices that were all balanced on the edge of potential destruction. Aveline's response would determine not only her own future, but also the welfare of hundreds of employees and thousands of investors who had trusted her with their financial security and career aspirations. Outside the conference room, in Phoenix, Financial Tower's marble lobby 42 floors below, Zephyr continued his maintenance duties with mechanical precision, while processing the reality that his daughter's courage had set in motion events that neither of them could control or predict. His supervisor Tom Bradley had assigned him to routine tasks in areas of the building where he would be unlikely to encounter media representatives or curious employees. But the protective isolation felt temporary and fragile. The crisis had reached its peak intensity, with every major stakeholder forced to confront fundamental questions about the relationship between personal integrity and professional success, the responsibilities that came with corporate power, and the price that families paid when individual ambition conflicted with human connection and authentic relationships. The moment of absolute truth arrived not in the corporate boardroom where Aveline had spent the morning defending her professional reputation and future, but in the small, windowless family conference room on the 15th floor of Seattle Family Court, where the institutional fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across faces marked by years of separation, regret, and carefully suppressed longing. The court-appointed mediator, Dr. Patricia Hayes, had spent 25 years helping families navigate complex custody disputes and parental rights cases, but rarely had she encountered a situation where personal and professional consequences were so intricately connected and where the stakes for all parties involved carried such broad social and economic implications. Aveline sat across from Zephyr for the first time in over 8 years. Their proximity in the small conference room creating an intimacy that felt both familiar and terrifying after nearly a decade of systematic avoidance and carefully maintained emotional distance. The legal documents spread across the table between them represented thousands of dollars in attorney fees and hundreds of hours of procedural complexity. But the human reality of their situation was far simpler and more heartbreaking than any court filing could adequately capture or address. Isabella, who had insisted on attending the mediation session despite her young age and the emotional complexity of the adult conversations that would determine her family's future structure, sat beside her grandmother Alina with an expression of quiet determination that suggested she understood the gravity of the moment and was prepared to advocate for her own interests and emotional needs, regardless of whatever legal or social conventions might typically exclude her from such discussions. The transformation in Avellini during the preceding 48 hours had been profound and visible, stripping away layers of corporate armor and professional control to reveal someone who looked younger and more vulnerable than she had appeared in years, but also somehow more authentic and genuinely present than the polished executive persona she had maintained throughout her rise to business prominence. Her usual carefully styled appearance had given way to a more natural look that reminded everyone in the room of the idealistic graduate student she had once been before success and social pressure had reshaped her priorities and identity. Dr. Hayes began the session by acknowledging the unusual circumstances that had brought them together and establishing ground rules for conversations that would need to address both legal requirements and emotional realities that extended far beyond typical custody negotiations. Her experience had taught her that successful family mediation required creating space for truth-telling and genuine communication, even when such honesty might be legally inconvenient or professionally damaging for the parties involved. Zephyr's opening statement, delivered in the same quiet, careful voice that had characterized all his interactions over the years, focused entirely on Isabella's welfare and his desire to contribute positively to her upbringing without creating additional stress or complications for anyone else involved in the situation. His lack of bitterness or resentment surprised everyone present, including Avellini, who had spent years anticipating anger and demands for revenge that had never materialized despite the profound injustices he had experienced. "I never stopped loving either of them," he said simply, his words carrying the kind of straightforward honesty that courtrooms rarely witnessed. "I understand why decisions were made the way they were, and I don't want to punish anyone for choices that seemed necessary at the time. I just want to be part of Isabella's life in whatever way makes sense for her happiness and security." His statement revealed a level of forgiveness and emotional maturity that transformed the adversarial atmosphere typically associated with family court proceedings. Isabella's contribution to the conversation demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of adult emotions and family dynamics that had enabled her to orchestrate the public revelation that brought everyone to this moment. Speaking directly to her mother with a clarity that belied her 7 years, she explained, "I knew you were scared about what people would think, but I wasn't scared about having a daddy who works hard and is kind to everyone. I just wanted us to be honest about who we are and stop pretending that important people in our family don't exist." The child's words hit Avellini with devastating accuracy, exposing the fundamental dishonesty that had shaped 8 years of family relationships and professional decisions. For the first time since Isabella's dramatic declaration in the shareholders' meeting, Avellini allowed herself to fully confront the reality that her efforts to protect her daughter from social judgment had actually been elaborate justifications for protecting her own carefully constructed public image and professional opportunities. Dr. Hayes guided the conversation toward practical arrangements for moving forward, but not before ensuring that each party had opportunity to express feelings and concerns that had been suppressed or ignored during years of legal separation and emotional avoidance. The mediator's questions revealed the depth of loss and regret that all three adults had experienced, and the remarkable resilience that Isabella had demonstrated in maintaining hope for family unity despite the obstacles that adult fears and social conventions had created. Eveline's moment of complete honesty came when Dr. Hayes asked her to explain her current feelings about the choices she had made and the relationships she had sacrificed in pursuit of business success and social acceptability. The answer required her to confront not only her abandonment of Zephyr, but also her willingness to deny Isabella access to her biological father and to construct an elaborate fictional narrative about their family history that prioritized reputation over authenticity. "I was 25 and terrified of being judged," Eveline admitted, her voice breaking for the first time in the carefully controlled professional environment where she had spent her adult life. "I convinced myself that I was protecting Isabella by giving her access to opportunities and social connections that wouldn't have been available if I had married someone from a different economic background. But the truth is that I was protecting myself from having to defend my choices to people whose approval I thought I needed more than I needed love or honesty." The admission represented a fundamental shift in Eveline's understanding of herself and her priorities, acknowledging that her business success had come at the cost of authentic relationships and genuine family connection. The recognition was painful but also liberating, creating space for conversations about rebuilding trust and establishing new family dynamics that could honor both Isabella's emotional needs and the legitimate concerns of all adults involved. In her welfare, Zephyr's response to Eveline's confession demonstrated the kind of grace and understanding that had characterized his approach to their separation from the beginning, focusing on forgiveness and forward movement rather than punishment or retribution for past injuries. "We were both young and facing pressures that felt overwhelming at the time," he said gently. "The important thing now is figuring out how to be the kind of family that Isabella deserves, regardless of what conventional families are supposed to look like." The legal framework for their new family arrangement would require months of negotiation and court approval, but the emotional foundation was established during that afternoon session when three adults and one remarkable child committed to prioritizing honesty and Isabella's welfare over social conventions and professional concerns that had previously seemed insurmountable. Elena's participation in the mediation revealed her own complicated feelings about the choices she had supported and the role she had played in maintaining family secrets that had ultimately harmed everyone involved, including the granddaughter she had been trying to protect. Her acknowledgement of mistakes and commitment to supporting whatever arrangements would best serve Isabella's emotional and developmental needs provided additional stability and continuity for a child whose world had been dramatically restructured, but who had never doubted her own worth or her right to claim the family relationships that adult fears had denied her. The session concluded with preliminary agreements about custody sharing, financial responsibilities, and communication protocols that would allow Isabella to maintain relationships with all the adults who loved her while providing structure and predictability for her daily life and educational needs. More importantly, it established principles of honesty and open communication that would guide future decision-making and ensure that Isabella's voice would continue to be heard and respected as her family learned to function as an unconventional but genuine unit. As they left the courthouse together for the first time in over 8 years, Eveline, Zephyr, and Isabella represented something unprecedented in all of their lives: a family based on truth rather than convenience, love rather than social expectations, and the courage to prioritize authentic relationships over professional reputation or community approval. 3 weeks after the family court mediation that had legally restored Zephyr's parental rights and established shared custody arrangements, the practical work of rebuilding relationships and restructuring lives began in earnest, requiring all parties to navigate uncharted territory where traditional social conventions provided little guidance for creating functional family dynamics between people. whose different economic backgrounds and life experiences had to be integrated into a coherent support system for Isabella's continued growth and development. The first major challenge emerged when Zephyr realized that his modest two-bedroom apartment in the Willowbrook district, while adequate for a single man living alone, was completely inadequate for hosting overnight visits from a 7-year-old, whose previous living arrangements had included private tutors, art classes, piano lessons, and recreational activities that required both space and financial resources that his maintenance worker salary could not easily accommodate. The recognition forced him to confront practical realities about economic inequality that idealistic discussions about love and family connection had not adequately addressed. Eveline's response to this practical dilemma revealed the depth of her personal transformation and her genuine commitment to making their unconventional family arrangement successful for Isabella's benefit rather than simply fulfilling legal obligations that court orders required. Instead of attempting to maintain the economic separation that had originally justified their separation, she proposed practical solutions that acknowledged their different financial capabilities while ensuring that Isabella's transitions between homes would not create additional stress or highlight uncomfortable disparities in living standards. The solution they developed involved Aveline providing financial assistance that enabled Zephyr to move to a larger apartment in a neighborhood closer to Roosevelt Elementary School, creating practical convenience for Isabella's daily school attendance while also establishing living arrangements that could accommodate the art supplies, musical instruments, and other educational materials that were important components of Isabella's intellectual and creative development. The financial arrangement was structured as a formal agreement that preserved Zephyr's dignity and autonomy while acknowledging the economic realities that shaped their family's practical needs. Margaret Chun, whose administrative skills had been essential to managing the corporate crisis at Corwin Financial Group, played an unexpected role in facilitating the family's practical arrangements by helping coordinate schedules, transportation logistics, and communication systems that allowed Isabella to maintain consistent relationships with both parents while minimizing the disruption to her educational progress and social relationships at school. Margaret's personal investment in the family's success reflected her growing understanding that professional success was meaningless without authentic personal relationships and genuine human connection. The corporate implications of Aveline's family crisis required a different kind of resolution, one that addressed not only immediate business concerns, but also longer-term questions about leadership integrity and the relationship between personal authenticity and professional effectiveness. In industries where public trust and reputation were essential components of competitive success, the board's initial response had been driven by crisis management concerns and stock price volatility, but the ongoing resolution required more thoughtful consideration of how personal growth and family commitments could actually enhance rather than compromise executive performance. Harold Westbrook, the board's senior member whose initial ultimatum had forced Aveline to confront the unsustainability of her double life, became an unexpected advocate for her continued leadership after witnessing the courage and integrity she demonstrated throughout the family reconciliation process. His decades of business experience had taught him that the most effective leaders were those who had learned to integrate personal values with professional responsibilities rather than maintaining artificial separations between different aspects of their lives. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, representing institutional investors whose initial concerns had focused on potential legal liabilities and regulatory complications, conducted a comprehensive analysis of the situation's actual impact on Corwin Financial Group's operational effectiveness and long-term strategic position. Her findings revealed that Aveline's increased emotional authenticity and personal integration had actually enhanced her decision-making capabilities and strategic vision, creating more sustainable leadership that could withstand future challenges and unexpected complications. The resolution of Aveline's professional situation involved implementing new corporate governance policies that acknowledge the reality of executive personal lives, while establishing clear protocols for managing potential conflicts of interest, and ensuring transparent communication with board members and major stakeholders. These policies, developed in consultation with legal and ethics specialists, created frameworks that could serve as models for other companies facing similar challenges in integrating personal authenticity with corporate responsibility. Dr. James Whitmore's role as Chief Financial Officer evolved to include increased responsibility for day-to-day operations, allowing Avellini to maintain strategic oversight while dedicating additional time and energy to family obligations and personal relationships that had been neglected during her single-minded pursuit of business success. This redistribution of executive responsibilities created opportunities for professional development throughout the organization, while establishing more sustainable work-life integration for senior leadership. The gradual restoration of investor confidence required several months of consistent performance and transparent communication about the company's governance improvements and leadership stability. But the eventual outcome exceeded initial expectations as Corwin Financial Group's stock price recovered and continued growing, supported by improved employee morale and enhanced corporate reputation for ethical leadership and social responsibility. Isabella's adjustment to her new family structure proceeded with remarkable resilience and emotional intelligence, though not without challenges that required patience and creative problem-solving from all the adults involved in her care. Her initial excitement about finally having access to her father was followed by a period of testing and exploration as she worked to understand how relationships that had been denied for 7 years could be rebuilt and sustained in practical daily arrangements. The development of new family traditions became an important component of Isabella's emotional security, creating shared experiences and memories that belonged specifically to their unconventional family unit rather than attempting to replicate conventional family structures that didn't fit their unique circumstances. These traditions included weekly art projects that combined Zephyr's practical construction skills with Isabella's creative talents, creating collaborative pieces that celebrated both of their artistic abilities and strengthened their developing father-daughter relationship. Zephyr's transition from invisible maintenance worker to acknowledged father and equal partner in Isabella's upbringing required significant personal adjustment and professional development that extended beyond the emotional aspects of reuniting with his daughter. His supervisors at Phoenix Financial Tower, initially concerned about potential workplace complications and media attention, gradually recognized that his situation had actually enhanced his value as an employee by demonstrating character qualities that were valuable in any professional context. The building's maintenance department, under Tom Bradley's continued leadership, developed policies for managing employee privacy and protecting staff members from unwanted attention or harassment that might result from personal situations becoming subjects of public interest or media coverage. These policies, informed by lessons learned from Zephyr's experience, created protective frameworks that benefited all employees while maintaining professional standards and operational effectiveness. Elena's role as Isabella's grandmother evolved to include more direct support for the co-parenting arrangement between Aveline and Zephyr, requiring her to overcome personal discomfort about social class differences and acknowledge her own contributions to family decisions that had harmed people she cared about. Her growing relationship with Zephyr was built on mutual respect for Isabella's welfare and shared commitment to providing stable, supportive environments for a child whose needs transcended adult concerns about social appropriateness or economic compatibility. The legal framework for their family arrangement required ongoing refinement and adjustment as practical experience revealed areas where court orders and mediation agreements needed modification to accommodate the realities of shared custody between parents whose different lifestyles and economic circumstances created complex logistics and communication challenges. Family court officials, initially skeptical about the viability of such an unconventional arrangement, gradually recognized it as a successful model for prioritizing children's emotional needs over traditional family structures. Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, Isabella's teacher at Roosevelt Elementary School, documented remarkable improvements in Isabella's academic performance and social development following the resolution of her family situation, providing evidence that children's educational success was significantly enhanced when their emotional security and family relationships were stable and authentic. Her observations contributed to broader discussions within educational communities about supporting students whose family structures differed from conventional social expectations. The broader Seattle community's response to the family story evolved from initial gossip and speculation to genuine admiration for their courage in prioritizing authentic relationships over social conventions and economic considerations. Media coverage shifted from sensationalistic reporting about corporate scandals to more thoughtful analysis of modern family structures and the challenges faced by parents trying to balance professional success with personal integrity and genuine family connection. Local businesses and community organizations began recognizing Zephyr's contributions to neighborhood development and social welfare, acknowledging skills and character qualities that had been overlooked when his identity was defined primarily by his employment status rather than his capabilities and community involvement. His construction expertise became valuable for volunteer projects and community improvement initiatives that benefited from his practical knowledge and generous commitment to helping others. The financial arrangements between Aveline and Zephyr evolved beyond immediate practical needs to include long-term planning for Isabella's education, healthcare, and future opportunities, creating collaborative decision-making processes that acknowledged both parents' different resources and capabilities while ensuring that Isabella's welfare remained the primary consideration in all family choices and investments. Isabella's artistic development flourished within her new family structure as she gained access to both Aveline's resources for professional instruction and materials and Zephyr's practical knowledge about construction and hands-on creation, combining influences that enriched her creative abilities and provided outlets for expressing complex emotions about identity, family, and belonging that had been central themes throughout her young life. The resolution of their family crisis created foundations for ongoing growth and development that acknowledged the reality that successful relationships require continuous attention, honest communication, and willingness to adapt to changing circumstances and evolving needs. Their story became evidence that love and commitment could overcome social barriers and economic differences when people were willing to prioritize authentic connection over conventional expectations and professional considerations. 6 months after Isabella's dramatic declaration in Phoenix Financial Tower's corporate conference room, the 3 members of this reconstructed family had created daily routines and weekly traditions that honored their different backgrounds while providing stability and security for a child whose courage had forced adults to confront their fears and choose truth over convenience, love over reputation, and family connection over social approval that had previously seemed essential but ultimately proved far less valuable than authentic relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. 1 year and 3 months after Isabella's fearless declaration had shattered carefully constructed lies and transformed 3 lives forever, the grand ballroom of the Seattle Convention Center sparkled with the kind of elegant sophistication that characterized the city's most prestigious charitable events. But tonight's gathering carried additional significance that extended far beyond typical corporate philanthropy and social networking. The annual Children's Foundation Gala, sponsored jointly by Corwin Financial Group and the Seattle Community Development Alliance, represented a partnership between corporate success and grassroots social action that would have been impossible Before Isabella's courage had forced her family to choose authenticity over artificial social boundaries, Eveline Corwin stood near the registration table, greeting guests with a confidence and genuine warmth that seemed effortless but represented the culmination of months of personal growth and professional transformation that had fundamentally changed her approach to leadership and life. Her navy blue evening gown was elegant but not ostentatious, chosen to reflect the sophisticated professionalism that had built her corporate empire while also honoring the community-focused values that now guided both her business decisions and personal priorities. The woman who had once hidden behind carefully constructed corporate armor now radiated the kind of authentic presence that came from integrating private values with public responsibilities. Beside her, Zephyr Stone wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo that had been selected with Elena's assistance and Eveline's financial support, but his comfort in formal social settings had developed through genuine confidence rather than external trappings. His transformation from invisible maintenance worker to recognized community leader and respected co-parent reflected not just changed circumstances, but fundamental personal growth that had been fostered by finally being able to openly embrace his role as Isabella's father and active participant in decisions that shaped her future and development. The evening's program would culminate with Isabella presenting awards to local teachers and community volunteers whose work with underprivileged youth exemplified the kind of social commitment that the Children's Foundation sought to support and recognize throughout the Pacific Northwest. But Isabella's role extended beyond ceremonial presentations to include a personal speech that she had written herself about courage, family, and the importance of fighting for truth, even when adults insisted that some things were too complicated. For honest discussion, Margaret Chun, now serving as Director of Corporate Social Responsibility at Corwin Financial Group, had coordinated the event's logistics with her characteristic attention to detail, while also managing media coverage that focused on positive community impact rather than sensationalistic personal drama. Her professional development had flourished within the company's new culture of authentic leadership and social engagement, creating career opportunities that aligned her administrative skills with meaningful work that contributed to community welfare and social justice initiatives. Dr. James Whitmore, who had assumed expanded responsibilities as Chief Operating Officer during Eveline's transition to a more balanced leadership approach, circulated among guests representing pension funds, community organizations, and local government agencies, whose partnership with Corwin Financial Group demonstrated how corporate success could be leveraged to address social problems and create opportunities for economic mobility and educational advancement in communities that had been historically underserved by traditional financial institutions. The guest list reflected the remarkable transformation that had occurred in Eveline's personal and professional networks over the past year, including people whose presence would have been inconceivable at previous corporate events. Tom Bradley, Phoenix Financial Tower's maintenance supervisor, sat at a prominent table with his wife and 2 teenage children, his recognition as an essential community leader reflecting changed understanding about the value and dignity of all forms of meaningful work. His presence symbolized broader shifts in corporate culture that acknowledged every employee's contributions and potential rather than maintaining artificial hierarchies based on education credentials or social background. Harold Westbrook, the board member whose tough questions had initially forced Eveline to confront the unsustainability of her compartmentalized life, served as the evening's master of ceremonies with obvious pride in the company's transformation. From a narrowly focused financial services firm to a socially engaged corporate citizen that used its resources and influence to create positive change throughout the Seattle metropolitan area. His introductory remarks emphasized how personal integrity and authentic leadership had enhanced rather than compromised the company's business performance and competitive position. Roosevelt Elementary School was represented by Principal Linda Foster and Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, Isabella's second-grade teacher, whose documentation of Isabella's academic and social development had contributed to research about supporting students from non-traditional family structures and helping children develop resilience and self-advocacy skills that served them throughout their educational journey. Their presence honored the crucial role that educational professionals played in nurturing young people whose family circumstances required additional understanding and creative support. Elena, Isabella's grandmother, had embraced her role as a bridge between different social worlds, using her experience and connections to facilitate relationships and opportunities that benefited not only her immediate family, but also other families facing similar challenges related to economic inequality and social class barriers. Her work with family court services had evolved into volunteer advocacy for parents navigating complex custody arrangements and legal systems that often failed to prioritize children's emotional needs over procedural requirements and traditional assumptions. The transformation in Phoenix Financial Tower's workplace culture had become a model for other corporations seeking to create environments where employees from all backgrounds could thrive and contribute their full capabilities rather than being limited by preconceptions about their potential or value. Zephyr's promotion to Building Operations Coordinator reflected recognition of leadership qualities and community knowledge that had been overlooked when his contributions were evaluated solely within narrow job descriptions and conventional career advancement expectations. As the evening's formal program began, Isabella took the stage with the poise and confidence that had characterized her original dramatic declaration, but now channeled toward positive community impact rather than family crisis resolution. Her purple dress, chosen to honor her favorite color while maintaining appropriate formality for the distinguished audience, sparkled under the ballroom chandeliers as she approached the microphone with a speech that had been practiced but not over-rehearsed, maintaining the authentic voice that had first captivated public attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella began, her clear young voice carrying easily throughout the ballroom, "my name is Isabella Corwin, and I want to tell you about the most important thing I've learned in my 8 years on this planet." The audience settled into attentive silence, recognizing that they were about to hear something significant from the child whose courage had inspired one of Seattle's most talked about family transformations and corporate culture changes. "I used to think that families were supposed to look a certain way and that successful people had to hide parts of themselves that might make other people uncomfortable." Isabella continued, her words demonstrating the sophisticated understanding of social dynamics that had enabled her to navigate complex adult emotions and motivations. "But I discovered that the most beautiful families are the ones where everyone gets to be honest about who they are and where they come from. And the most successful people are the ones who use their power to help other people feel safe being honest too." The audience's response was immediate and enthusiastic, but Isabella wasn't finished with her message. "I want to thank my mom for learning that being a great leader means being brave enough to admit when you've made mistakes, and for showing me that business success is only meaningful if it helps create a better world for everyone." Eveline's eyes filled with tears of pride and gratitude as her daughter's words acknowledged both personal growth and professional transformation. "And I want to thank my dad for teaching me that the most important work people do isn't always the kind that gets recognized with fancy awards or high salaries, but that dignity and kindness are more valuable than money or status." Zephyr's emotional response was visible throughout the ballroom, his pride in Isabella's wisdom and character evident to everyone present. "But most of all," Isabella concluded, "I want to thank everyone here tonight for supporting organizations and programs that help families be honest with each other and help communities include everyone regardless of where they work or how much money they have or what their family structure looks like. The children who will receive scholarships and support from tonight's fundraising will grow up knowing that their dreams matter and that their families matter, and that's the most important." gift we can give to the next generation. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, but beyond the immediate emotional response, Isabella's speech sparked conversations throughout the ballroom about corporate responsibility, family authenticity, and community inclusion. That continued long after the formal program concluded. Social media coverage of her remarks generated positive discussion about modern family structures and workplace equality that reached millions of viewers worldwide, demonstrating how personal courage and authentic storytelling could inspire broader social change and greater acceptance of diversity in all its forms. The evening's fundraising results exceeded all previous records, generating over $2 million for programs supporting educational opportunities, family services, and community development initiatives throughout the Pacific Northwest. But the event's significance extended beyond financial contributions to include relationship building and partnership development that would create lasting change in how Seattle's business and social communities addressed inequality and supported families facing economic and social challenges. As guests began departing the convention center, many stopped to congratulate all 3 members of the Corwin-Stone family on their courage, integrity, and positive impact on their community's understanding of leadership, family, and social responsibility. The conversations reflected genuine admiration and respect rather than curiosity or judgment, demonstrating how authenticity and vulnerability could transform public perception and create opportunities for meaningful connection across traditional social boundaries. Local television stations featured extensive coverage of the gala's success, with particular emphasis on Isabella's speech and the ongoing positive impact of her family's decision to prioritize truth and authentic relationships over social conventions and economic considerations. National media outlets picked up the story as an example of how corporate leadership and family values could be successfully integrated to create both business success and social impact that benefited entire communities. The drive home from the convention center took them through Seattle neighborhoods where Zephyr's construction projects had created affordable housing and community gathering spaces, past Roosevelt Elementary School, where Isabella continued to excel academically and socially, and through the financial district where Phoenix Financial Tower stood as a symbol of how corporate success could be built on foundations of integrity and social responsibility rather than exploitation and inequality. Isabella fell asleep in the backseat of their car, exhausted but satisfied by the evening's success and the visible evidence that her original courage in claiming her complete family had created ripple effects that extended far beyond their personal situation to touch hundreds of other families and thousands of community members who benefited from the programs and partnerships that her honesty had made possible. Eveline and Zephyr, sitting together in comfortable silence as they navigated the late-night traffic, represented something unprecedented in both of their lives. Co-parents who had learned to integrate love, respect, and shared commitment to their daughter's welfare with practical cooperation and mutual support that honored their different backgrounds while creating stable, nurturing environments for Isabella's continued growth and development. The story that had once threatened to destroy careers and relationships had instead become an inspiration for personal authenticity, corporate responsibility, and community engagement that demonstrated how individual courage could spark collective transformation and create lasting positive change. Isabella's fearless declaration of "real daddy" had evolved from a moment of family crisis into a symbol of the power that comes from choosing truth over convenience, love over fear, and family connection over social approval. Their new beginning was built on foundations that could withstand future challenges because they were based on honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment to using their resources and influence to create opportunities for other families facing similar struggles, with authenticity, acceptance, and belonging in communities that were still learning to embrace diversity in all its forms. The internet that had once buzzed with speculation and scandal now celebrated their story as evidence that love really could conquer social barriers, that families could be successfully reconstructed around truth and commitment, and that business success could be enhanced rather than compromised by leaders who integrated personal integrity with professional responsibility and community engagement. Isabella Corwin Stone, now 8 years old and thriving in her complete family, had become living proof that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single act of courage from someone, small enough to see clearly through adult complications, to the simple truth that families belong together and that love should never have to hide in shadows or apologize for existing across social and economic boundaries that had been constructed to divide rather than unite communities and hearts. 3 years later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site where the new Seattle Children's Community Center was taking shape, its steel framework rising against the backdrop of Mount Rainier like a monument to the power of collaboration between corporate resources and grassroots community organizing. Isabella Corwin Stone, now 11 years old and already showing signs of the leadership qualities that had first emerged when she was 7, stood beside her father Zephyr as he explained the building's innovative design features that would create flexible spaces for educational programs, family services, and cultural events that would serve over 3,000 children and families throughout the greater Seattle metropolitan area. Her notebook, filled with detailed sketches and carefully written observations about architecture, engineering, and project management, reflected the sophisticated understanding of community development that had been fostered through 3 years of accompanying both parents to work sites, board meetings, and neighborhood planning sessions where her perspectives were not only welcomed, but actively sought by adults who had learned to appreciate the clarity and wisdom that often came from young people unencumbered by conventional thinking and established assumptions about what was possible or practical. Zephyr, now serving as Director of Community Development for the Seattle Construction Cooperative, had transformed his personal experience with economic inequality and social barriers into professional expertise that guided affordable housing projects, community facility construction, and workforce development programs throughout the Pacific Northwest. His promotion from building maintenance to executive leadership represented not just individual success, but broader changes in how organizations recognized and developed talent, regardless of educational credentials or traditional career pathways. The construction cooperative itself had evolved from his original vision for socially conscious building practices into a worker-owned business that provided living wages, comprehensive benefits, and ownership opportunities for employees whose backgrounds might have excluded them from traditional corporate advancement in other industries. The cooperative's success had inspired similar initiatives throughout the region, creating a network of businesses committed to economic justice and community empowerment that generated both financial sustainability and social impact. Eveline's transformation from crisis-driven corporate executive to integrated leader and social entrepreneur had been documented in business schools and leadership development programs as an example of how authentic personal growth could enhance rather than compromise professional effectiveness and competitive advantage. Her approach to corporate governance now emphasized stakeholder capitalism and community partnership that created value for shareholders while also addressing social problems and contributing to regional economic development that benefited working families and marginalized communities. Corwin Financial Group's expansion into community development finance and social impact investing had generated both impressive financial returns and measurable improvements in housing affordability, small business development, and educational opportunity throughout the Pacific Northwest. The company's success had attracted national attention from investors and policymakers interested in models for using private capital to address public problems while maintaining fiduciary responsibility to shareholders and institutional investors. The Children's Community Center, project represented the culmination of 3 years of collaboration between Corwin Financial Group's investment resources and the Seattle Construction Cooperative's development expertise. But it also symbolized something more profound about how personal relationships and family experiences could inspire professional innovation and community transformation that extended far beyond individual circumstances to create lasting institutional change. Isabella's role in the project had evolved from enthusiastic observer to active participant, whose ideas about child-centered design and intergenerational programming had been incorporated into architectural plans and operational systems that would serve families for decades to come. Her artistic talents, now refined through years of professional instruction and community engagement, had contributed to public art installations and wayfinding systems that would make the facility welcoming and accessible to children and adults from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds. The weekly family meetings that had initially been necessary for coordinating custody schedules and managing practical logistics had evolved into collaborative planning sessions where all 3 family members contributed their different skills and perspectives to projects and decisions that affected not only their household but also the broader community organizations and initiatives that had become central to their shared sense of purpose and social responsibility. Elena, Isabella's grandmother, had become a respected advocate for kinship care and extended family support systems, using her experience navigating complex family court procedures to help other grandparents and relatives access legal resources and social services that enabled them to provide stable homes for children whose parents faced challenges related to economic instability, health problems, or other circumstances that temporarily or permanently affected their caregiving capacity. Her volunteer work with Seattle Family Court had led to policy recommendations that prioritized children's emotional security and family connections over rigid adherence to traditional custody arrangements that often failed to acknowledge the reality of modern family structures and the importance of maintaining relationships with all adults who played significant roles in children's lives and development. Margaret Chun's professional growth within Corwin Financial Group had culminated in her appointment as Vice President of Strategic Partnerships, a position that leveraged her administrative expertise and relationship-building skills to develop alliances between private sector resources and community-based organizations working on issues related to education, housing, and economic mobility. Her success had created career advancement opportunities for other employees whose potential had been overlooked within traditional corporate hierarchies. Dr. James Whitmore, now serving as Chief Executive Officer while Aveline transitioned to Executive Chair focused on strategic vision and community engagement, had maintained the company's financial performance while expanding its commitment to environmental sustainability and social responsibility. His leadership style emphasized collaborative decision-making and employee development that created pathways for advancement based on merit and contribution rather than educational credentials or social connections. Harold Westbrook, the board member whose challenging questions had initially forced Aveline to confront the contradictions between her public success and private authenticity, had become a mentor and advocate for other corporate leaders facing similar struggles with integrating personal values and professional responsibilities. His consulting work with family-owned businesses and closely held companies emphasized the importance of succession planning and governance structures that honored both business objectives and family relationships. The broader Seattle community had embraced the Corwin Stone family story as evidence that social change was possible when people chose courage over convenience and authenticity over artificial social boundaries. Their example had inspired other families to seek legal remedies for unjust custody arrangements, encouraged employers to reconsider hiring and promotion practices that excluded qualified candidates based on background assumptions, and motivated community organizations to develop programs that supported non-traditional family structures. Roosevelt Elementary School had become a model for educational institutions seeking to support students from diverse family backgrounds, with policies and programs that recognized the reality that children's academic success and social development were enhanced when schools acknowledged and celebrated all forms of family commitment and community connection rather than privileging conventional structures over functional relationships based on love and responsibility. Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, now serving as the school's assistant principal, had developed curriculum and training programs that helped educators recognize and address the needs of students whose family circumstances required additional understanding and creative support. Her work had been adopted by school districts throughout Washington state and had influenced teacher preparation programs at regional universities. The annual Children's Foundation Gala had become Seattle's premier charitable event, generating millions of dollars for programs supporting family stability, educational opportunity, and community development, while also serving as a platform for celebrating individuals and organizations whose work contributed to social justice and economic mobility. Isabella's continued role as youth spokesperson had evolved to include policy advocacy and public speaking that reached audiences throughout North America. International media attention had transformed their local family story into a global example of how personal courage and authentic leadership could create positive social change that transcended individual circumstances to inspire broader movements for economic justice and family rights. Documentary films, academic research, and policy analysis had examined their experience as a case study in successful family reconstruction and corporate social responsibility. The legal precedents established through their family court proceedings had influenced custody law and parental rights policies in multiple jurisdictions, creating more flexible and child-centered approaches to family dispute resolution that prioritized emotional security and relationship preservation over traditional assumptions about appropriate family structures and economic qualifications for effective parenting. Isabella's artistic development had flourished within an environment that encouraged creative expression as a tool for social commentary and community engagement. Her paintings and sculptures, displayed in galleries and public spaces throughout the Pacific Northwest, reflected themes of family resilience, economic justice, and intergenerational cooperation that resonated with audiences facing their own challenges with authenticity, belonging, and social acceptance. Her plans for high school included advanced courses in business, architecture, and social work that would prepare her for college studies in community development and public policy, fields where she could continue the family tradition of using professional skills and economic resources to create opportunities for other families and communities facing barriers related to inequality and social exclusion. The construction site, where father and daughter stood planning the day's activities, would soon become a gathering place for hundreds of children whose families struggled with poverty, displacement, and social isolation, but would find within the new facility's walls the kind of support and community connection that had been essential to Isabella's own development and success. The building's cornerstone bore an inscription that captured the essence of their family's journey and its continuing impact on their community, dedicated to the courage of children who refuse to accept that families must be separated by fear, and to the wisdom of adults who learn that authentic love creates stronger foundations than artificial social boundaries. As construction workers arrived for the morning shift, many of them employees of the Seattle Construction Cooperative, whose lives had been improved by the organization's commitment to fair wages and worker ownership. Isabella and Zephyr reviewed the day's construction, milestones, and community engagement, activities that would bring local families to the site for tours, and input on programming that would serve their needs and interests. The scene represented something that would have been impossible to imagine 3.5 years earlier, when Isabella first ran across Phoenix Financial. Tower's marble lobby to claim her real daddy in front of Seattle's business elite. The frightened 7-year-old who had risked everything to reunite. Her family had grown into a confident 11-year-old whose continued courage was creating opportunities for thousands of other children and families to experience the kind of acceptance, support, and community connection that every person deserved regardless of their economic circumstances or family structure. Their story continued to break the internet, but now for all the right reasons, as proof that love really could overcome social barriers, that families could be successfully rebuilt around truth and commitment, and that individual courage could spark collective transformation that created lasting positive change for entire communities and generations yet to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.